Oh, finally, after all this time, I found it. The official Wizards list of the strongest cards in Commander. Here it is, the most broken cards in EDH and... Wait, snow-covered plains? This is terrible. Wiley, are you seeing this? This is just garbage, it's draft chaff. There's nothing here. Why would Wizards make a list of the strongest cards and fill it with nothing? They wouldn't do that, would they? Wizards of the Coast created the bracket system in an effort to give casual players more tools to help Rule Zero conversations, so casual Commander players can have even more balanced games. Part of the bracket system is the Game Changers list. Here's a definition of a game changer according to Wizards. Game changers dramatically warp Commander games, allowing players to run away with resources, shift games in ways that many players dislike, block people from play, efficiently search their strongest cards, or have commanders that tend to take away from more casual games. Since this article and the updates to the Game Changers list, I've been thinking a lot about Game Changers. It's something I think a lot of players wrongly focus on when determining the power of their decks. In this video, I want to talk about Game Changers, their role in finding out what bracket your deck is in, and I want to take a deeper look into the list, maybe critiquing it a bit. First though, out of my way, stupid podcast co-hosts, I'm ballin'. I'm really happy to announce I've partnered with Dragon Shield to make my own sleeves. Beevuu really knocked it out of the park with the art here. I love that stupid shrimp meme, so I just asked them to recreate it. And if you look closely, you will notice I am dunking a Pyrite Spell Bomb specifically. Link below if you want to buy these sleeves, and not only does that support the channel, but it also supports my friend Beevuu, who does all the art for this channel. And don't forget to use my code TTM at checkout if you need anything at all from Dragon Shield. Finding the power level of your deck is a tricky thing to do, especially if you're not super knowledgeable about the game. Or is it? Because if you're a new player, unless you googled most strongestest commander deck, are you actually playing a strong commander deck? Most casual decks can actually just play fairly well together. But for more enfranchised players, I think this is where the bracket system comes into play. It helps us set up expectations. The benefit of this system is that when I say my deck is bracket 2 to the letter of the law, you can now make assumptions about my deck, and you know it does not have any game changers in it, no 2-card combos. This info is neat to have, and although you can still yap more, I think that the strength of brackets is that it is a shorthand for saying a few things about your deck very quickly. You can even say my deck is bracket 2, except I have a vampiric tutor because it is flavorful for my vampire deck. Now, a big part of the distinction between brackets 2, 3, and 4 are game changers, which most casual players get hung up on. So let's analyze the game changers list for a bit here. Is this an accurate way of separating strong decks from weaker ones? Well, the list is not all encompassing, and it is actually impossible to have every vaguely strong card on the list. One, because if the list gets too long, it's no longer practical to use, it becomes confusing, especially for new players. Which is why the list should stay pretty short, and really only have some of the most game warping cards on it. Humility is a perfect example of a game changer. This card is very powerful, and for sure warps the game. It's a card I can't even just say play more removal about, because a lot of removal doesn't work against it. Other great examples of game changers are raw power cards, something like Smothering Tithe or Rhystic Study. These are simply some of the most busted cards in the format, so easily they should go on the list for a raw power level reason. But are we missing any cards? What about Chains of Mephistopheles? This card is crazy powerful. Basically, it turns your draws, other than the first one, in your draw step into rummage effects, and if you don't have any cards in hand, you just mill instead. Also, this is a 2-mana card, so it is very easy to play early game. What about Gilded Drake? If you think Drannith Magistrate is annoying, well, trust me, Gilded Drake is also very annoying. This steals your commander indefinitely, and if you kill your commander and recast it, I can blink the Drake and steal it again. Now, some people might say these aren't on the list due to price or accessibility, but right now, Tabernacle and Gaia's Cradle, which are both game changers, are not cheap cards. In fact, if you go to Cool Stuff Inc. right now, you can buy a Chains for way less than a Cradle. And don't forget to use my discount code TTM if you do buy one. So I just don't buy the argument that these cards are not on the list due to their price or accessibility. Now, if we were to add cards to the list, you'd probably want to remove some as well. There are a ton of cards on this Game Changers list that make little to no sense. Let's start with Tutors. Vampiric Tutor is literally only as strong as the best card in your deck, which in theory is not something so broken that you would ruin and warp the game. Like, yeah, tutoring for a Smothering Tithe can change the game. But is that because of the tutor or the tithe? It's the classic argument I see from players saying, Thassa's Oracle Consultation combo doesn't belong in casual, so I cut all the tutors from my deck. Instead of cutting, I don't know, Thassa's Oracle? If you're playing a deck which is fair and balanced, at the table, a tutor can literally never be an overpowered card. Plus, the tutors they have are mostly the generic ones, which means if you're playing an archetype that is supported with tutors, you get the same effect regardless. Obviously, I recognize that the generic ones have more utility, but those specific ones are primarily looking for one or two of their best effects. And if you build a deck with a generic tutor aiming for your best effects, it's kind of the same play pattern, isn't it? It's fine if you personally dislike tutors, I really don't care. But when we're talking about game-changing effects, things that warp the format, me casting Demonic Tutor to grab a silly arcane card from my arcane deck is not changing the game. I also recognize it increases consistency of finding your best cards, but honestly, that just shows how these don't work as game changers. Why would my deck, which only has one copy of my best card, get punished for playing tutors by having them use up my game changer slots? When a Elf Ball deck has multiple copies of their best card, insane consistency, and specific tutors for their list. Look, I'm not going to yap about tutors for this entire video, I've made other videos about it. I assure you whatever you're typing in the comments is addressed in one of these videos, so just watch those instead. I will say, I think tutor engines like Survival of the Fittest and mana cost cheating tutors like Natural Order are much more suited to be game changers. Honestly, we could clear up a lot of the list. The newly unbanned cards, which got automatically added to the Game Changers list, are fine to take off. Coalition Victory is not even close to the best alt win con we have access to. Panoptic Mirror is just not a strong card. Yeah, you can take extra turns with it, but that goes against the bracket guidelines already. So your deck would no longer be bracket 2 or whatever by letter of the law if you had the infinite turns combo. Also, this 2-card combo takes a ton of mana and requires a full turn cycle before you can actually use it, making it significantly weaker than a lot of the actually good 2-card combos, and honestly much worse than many other 3-card combos as well. Biorhythm should also be taken off the list here. It's a big dumb spell that ends the game. We have a lot of those, and this one is way funnier than Craterhoof. Now the free counters I'm on the fence about. Usually in these videos, I'm telling you my opinion or trying to convince you of something. In this video, I'm trying to explain game changers are not all they're made out to be, but I can't really decide if these should be game changers or not. On one hand, these don't change or warp the game. They don't actually prevent your opponents from doing things in the same way that a stacks piece does. Ultimately, they function the same as regular counterspells. They just happen to be 0 mana, which I understand makes them more powerful, but Mana Drain isn't a game changer, and that is a very powerful counterspell. Additionally, Pact of Negation and Force of Negation are not game changers either, and Pact of Negation is really, really good. It is honestly on par with these other 2 spells in terms of protecting your combo wins, and it doesn't provide card disadvantage like Force of Will does, so oftentimes can be a similar power level in stopping your opponent's wins. So do these really count as game-changing effects if they're a one and done that provide no value? In fact, Force of Will is less card advantage value than regular counterspell. Anyway, all of that makes me think that why are these 2 on the list when these other good spells aren't? On the other hand, though, of all the free interaction there is, free counterspells are by far the most powerful. The flexibility and utility from just a Pact of Negation is insane. This is a real powerhouse. The power level argument can be made here. and that all the good free counter spells should be game changers. I'm a bit on the fence about this, so let me know in the comments below what you think. Should these be taken off the game changers list, or should they stay on and maybe even add Pact of Negation? Quick disclaimer, any Rule Zero conversation only works when people are truthful. Yes, people can angle shoot or lie, and then this all doesn't work. But that is the same with any Rule Zero system you come up with. So we are thinking about the bracket system in a way where everyone is honestly taking it in good faith and attempting to adhere to it to the best of their abilities. Alright, so what even is a strong card? Like, what does Chains, Humility, and Smothering Tithe do that others don't? To me, a truly powerful card in EDH is one that either restricts resources or provides an overabundance of resources. Necropotence, overabundance. Narset Parter of Veils, restriction. Thassa's Oracle, despite seeming like neither, is actually a restriction of resources. It's a win con that restricts the ways you can interact with it, since unlike a Laboratory Maniac, which folds to removal, or a Craterhoof, which can be dodged with a fog, Oracle necessitates counter magic or stacks pieces, meaning a lot of colors or decks will have literally no answer to it. This is why a lot of game changers are kind of silly to me. These tutors don't provide any resources or stop me from playing the game, and some of these threats are just so underpowered compared to others which provide more value or restrict me more. Ideally, at this point in the video, you are at least somewhat in agreement that the Game Changers list is at the very least imperfect. Well, next I want to address whether or not one card can actually even change the game. There are some cards which can't be beaten by conventional means. Cards that restrict resources heavily, for example, will often require your opponents to play low mana cost cheap interaction to beat it. Your casual EDH removal, which is flexible but inefficient, is just way worse against a stacks piece when you compare it to a 1 mana targeted hate card. Cards that generate a large amount of value also require specific cards to beat them. Either your opponents need to have a similar tier of value to keep up with you, or they need a high density of early game interaction because in just a few turn cycles, your value engine can create an insurmountable advantage. Because of this, there are game changers, single cards that warp games. When you put the One Ring in your deck, the games where you draw it and cast it, your deck likely performs much better than without the One Ring. These cards can create large power spikes in your deck's performance, and if your opponent is not playing such cards, then games can feel lopsided. For this reason, I like the idea of a Game Changers list. A list of cards that can genuinely catch a new player off guard. If you're playing low power bracket 2, then maybe cards like Chains, Humility, and Necropotence are not appropriate. And if you choose to brew in a higher bracket, you can look at the Game Changers list and realize these cards might show up and spike the power of a deck. Then you can keep that in mind when deck building. And if you choose to brew in bracket 4, you know that these cards are abundant and will likely show up in high quantities in every game. And again, you can account for this in your deck building. This is another reason I'm not super happy with tutors being on the Game Changers list specifically, since this only leads to power spikes if you use them to tutor up the broken card. In a deck with no busted cards, the tutor can literally never act as a proper game changer. Cards that single-handedly create so much value or restrict your opponent's value heavily such that they cannot play most strategies without immediately removing the card is what we need to look out for in our decks. Cards that stand out without synergy. Once we introduce synergy, sky's the limit. Is Craterhoof a good card? Yes, it's a great finisher. If you have a board, the power of Craterhoof is predicated on how quickly and efficiently you can assemble a board. On an episode of the Magic Mirror podcast, a viewer asked if we consider Overburden a game changer tier card. And personally, I do. This card has a low mana value and restricts your opponent's resources unless they are playing a deck with almost no creatures. This type of resource restriction without any synergy makes this card functionally halt most decks until it's removed. By the way, I have a podcast with Snail and Elk. You should check it out if you only watch the main videos. There's a playlist to all of them on the channel. But does all of this matter? I feel like this is a good framework to determine what should be a game changer tier card. Something that might actually blindside a new player and spike the power of your deck. A card that completely shuts down decks by itself. Yet, when we look at the precons that were printed with a game changer in there, we're told they're still bracket 2. And we have Soul Ring not on the game changers list, which also easily spikes the power of decks. Playing against one of those precons does not feel like it's a bracket 3 deck. So what gives? Well, ultimately, one card does not actually change the average power level of your deck. Even 3 cards doesn't. This is why players on average don't even hate Soul Ring. If your opponent played it every single game, you'd probably get sick of it, but since it shows up here and there and spikes one game, people give it a pass. To determine the power of a deck, yes, looking at the strongest plays is something you should do, and many times those strongest plays would be your game changers. But we also need to look at what your deck does on average and how to beat the average play pattern of the list. This is what I think actually makes the difference between a bracket 2 or 3 deck. What your deck does consistently and how can players beat it? This is actually where I want to get back to tutors for a moment. I don't think they should be game changers because in bracket 2, tutoring for a dumb useless card is fine. In fact, you should do that. You should play the dumb silly cards more often, but they do affect the consistency of your list, meaning a high amount of tutors can raise the average power level of a deck, and that does mean your list probably leans towards bracket 3 because the average thing your deck does is strong. Remember, brackets are about intent. If you intend to tutor for a combo all the time, that is very different than tutoring for a synergy piece all the time. So I would like to see them off the game changers list, but maybe adding tutors back to the bracket guidelines and saying a high density of generic tutors might lean you towards bracket 3. An easy way to cover your bases when thinking about the power of your deck is to goldfish it, which means playing against nobody, and really think about what does your opponent need to do to beat your deck. If the answer is something rather specific, like one type of interaction or a style of deck building, like having a low reliance on lands, or very low cost interaction to efficiently take away your cards in the early turns, then your deck is likely leaning towards bracket 3 or a higher power level than that. If the answer to how does this deck lose is your opponent plays a board wipe, they use graveyard hate by turn 6-ish, then those are normal regular things every deck has access to in every color. So in addition to the other bracket guidelines, we're gonna probably lean towards bracket 2. This is why a very optimized deck with lots of card draw and recursion and efficient removal, but no game changers, can be technically bracket 2, but it plays a lot more like a 3. If your average power level is causing you to win very close to turn 6 with consistency, and that requires a lot of interaction early game to slow you down before you snowball into that win, then your deck is probably bracket 3 regardless of game changers. Now remember, bracket 2 is not an excuse to play no interaction. If someone plays a Pillow Fort card, they are not pub stomping. You just need to play enchantment removal or have a win con outside of raw combat damage. Let's look at a few decks and apply these principles to determine where they should go in the bracket system. Links to my deck list below, and they may have changed if you're watching this video at a later date, so don't be surprised if some lists here look different or they're just retired. My Tormod Ishai deck is an artifact list with Salvaging Station as my hidden commander. The deck aims to assemble repeatable removal and card draw engines, then win with an overwhelming amount of tokens or Ishai beats. This deck is very slow to assemble its value engines, and can be easily stopped by normal interaction. Despite having a large amount of artifact tutors, which are not game changers, and being able to consistently put together some of its most powerful plays with Salvaging Station, it's really not that strong. I do have some counter magic to protect it, but that's about it. The normal average cards that you can find in booster packs today have the ability to stop my win. You have plenty of time to find them, and you don't need to play in an overabundance of efficient removal to quickly dismantle my deck in the earlier turns. This deck is 100% bracket 2 despite the tutors and removal engines. I have played it a bunch and I have never had anyone even think this deck is too strong, likely because it loses often, it's not very good. Moving on to a bracket 3 list, we have my Mina in Den deck. This is a new version of the list. So if you're thinking about my old one with the Eldrazi, take a peek at the link below and see the new version. This is a turbo ramp deck where it tries to spiral into enough cards and mana to explode my opponents with one of a few win cons. Marriott Lage, Borborygmos Enraged, or a Field of the Dead. And with a large amount of tutors, finding the right win con at the right time is fairly easy. This deck is trying to turbo into one of those win cons super quickly, so you need relatively low to the ground efficient removal, or an early Marriott Lage will take you out of the game. This deck is rather low on interaction itself because it is all in on crushing my opponents. It goes from 0 to 100 pretty fast, and tries to take players out of the game rather quickly. Once this deck sets up, especially with Field of the Dead, it puts out a lethal amount of damage turn after turn, meaning one singular board wipe is not nearly enough to stop this list. To beat this deck, you either need to combo faster than I can build my board, or have a very large amount of repeatable interaction of various kinds to actually beat it. Because if you can't exile these lands, I can easily loop them out of my graveyard and deck over and over again. This deck is powerful. The plays that I tutor for consistently are very powerful. It should really only be played with other rather strong lists that can put pressure on this deck early game or have good interaction to actually slow me down. This is solidly bracket 3. Now, are there exceptions to the guidelines I've put forth in this video? Perchance. You might be able to poke a hole here and there in my theory, and if you can, let me know in the comments below. Ultimately, for any deck, you can just play it and test to see how strong or weak it feels. If you play it against a bunch of bracket 2 decks and you're crushing them, it's probably maybe bracket 3. Overall, I like the idea of a Game Changers list, but I think as they are now, it is not a great way of determining power level. Too many of the cards on the list are simply not what actually makes your deck strong. And there are a lot of cards off the list which I feel have more game-changing power than Wizards is giving them credit for. I do think that if you look at your list and single out the cards that without synergy heavily restrict your opponents or give you a huge amount of advantage and consider those your game changers, it will help you better determine the power level of your deck and make sure you're not playing any cards that are probably too strong for lower brackets. And to actually determine the power level of your deck, you can ask yourself, what does it take to beat this list? Think about how reasonable it would be for the average not super enfranchised player to know about that and play it in their deck. Because if they literally can't beat your deck, then your list is probably on a different power level. Moth Covered Rock asks, I have an IRL play group where even the Commander welcome decks are considered fairly strong. I found it difficult to brew at this power level because any amount of synergy between cards or strong individual cards can take over a game fairly easily. I've tried to get them to run more removal, but they're just not there yet. How do you think you would go about brewing for an environment like this? Well, there's a few solutions. One answer is just play stronger decks and win every game until they decide to put a couple extra removal spells in their deck. Alternatively, you can try and add other restrictions, like build closer to bracket 1, have like more thematic restrictions, because that can really slow down your deck. Additionally, you can play some really just old bad jank commanders. Think of like Hakan, where you have to get him in your hand and then get him in the graveyard before he actually does anything. Cards like that have multiple hoops to jump through can give your opponents lots of time before they actually need to do anything to stop you. So I'd say brew around with things like that. Thanks for watching. If you want to be in the credits like my tier 3 patrons here, all you got to do is click the link below. Or if you want to ask questions like Moth Covered Rock did, also part of the Patreon, link below.